This is Hannibal from thehannibaltv.com, and we usually do professional wrestling and MMA related interviews, but we have done some UFO related interviews, and today is going to be another UFO related interview because on the line we have the author of the Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, My Story by Calvin Parker, which is available on Amazon now, but we have Calvin Parker himself on the line who discusses in this book an alien abduction incident that occurred with him and one of his friends in 1973 in Pascagoula, Mississippi. How are you tonight, Mr. Parker?
I'm great. How are y'all?
I'm doing well. I was actually in Mississippi back in October conducting a wrestling interview. And I find that sometimes when mainstream media makes fun of abduction incidents, they sometimes make fun of the fact that sometimes they take place in secluded places. But when I was driving through Mississippi, it is very rural and very secluded, so I could see how something like that could happen there and it wouldn't be a mass sighting.
Right. You know, it was some eyewitnesses to it, and that's all accounted for in the book.
And the eyewitness accounts came out later because I guess originally you guys didn't want this story to go public because you were about to get married and you were only 19 and you didn't want to have this reputation. And then you ended up moving, and now it's many decades later that you finally have come out with this book, I guess, just to get everything documented.
Yeah, what it was, when I would give an interview with the media, or the media would track me down and say they had an interview with me, then it would somehow end up getting changed. And I didn't like that. If you're going to do an interview with someone, you do it just raw and you let them, you don't change what they say. So I was having a problem with that. And I actually wasn't going to write a book, but Philip Mantle with a Flying Disc Press, he said, well, look, Calvin, if you do it or write a book, it's documented. That's your words, that's your legacy, and they can't go in there and change it on you. All you got to do is tell them to read the book.
And I guess when this took place in 1973, from what I understand, it was national news, and it was the first real big alien abduction story that ever came out. Is that about correct?
Oh, was it national news? Of course, in 73, you don't have the social media, or you didn't have cell phones. And I guess word of mouth traveled faster than anything. But when this happened, we were at the sheriff department, and this is the only way I could figure out that it leaked. The sheriff department brought us in, interrogated us, put us in a room together, and then the next morning we got up and went to work, and we asked them not to say nothing to nobody. But when we got to work, it was just storms of media there. And the only way I could figure out is maybe somebody at the sheriff department leaked it, or during the 70s, the scanners was real bad, where they would scan the sheriff department radios and police radios and all that. And everybody and their brother had one, and somebody might have heard it and leaked it out like that. Even the press had scanners, so that could be very well how it got leaked.
And since you've written your book, I know you've been on, I think, Fox and a few other major television shows, haven't you? Could you name some of the television shows you've been on for news for this?
I could. One's Fox News. Then I've been on all the local news stations here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Then I was on ITV out of the UK, and from what I understand, they have millions of viewers, and it's several more. It's hard to remember them, but every night since the book's released, I've been on some kind of program, and it's just about wore me down.
I can imagine because I guess if you were, I'm not a great mathematician, but how old are you now if you were 19 in 1973?
64.
64 years old, okay.
Yes, sir.
And the other gentleman that was with you has since passed on.
He has. I think he did. I never really kept up with him, but about 7 years ago. Oh, and I'm going to do a show this coming Thursday with the Travel Channel, so I got a flight flying out of here before too long. Going to Austin, Texas, and I'll be over there for a few days with the Travel Channel.
Okay, well, I just wanted to establish for people that haven't heard about your story in your book that how major a story this was. But could you actually get into the situation? I understand you were a fisherman and you had just finished a day's work and you were fishing when all of this occurred.
Yes, sir, that's true. We'd got off work. It was October the 11th of 1973. And for an October day, it was probably 90 degrees that day. So we had got off work and decided to go fishing to kind of relax a little bit before we went home. So we picked our fishing equipment up and went to a place in Pascagoula. It was an old abandoned shipyard, the Shaw Peters Shipyard, and pulled up and parked. And it was, as far as getting there, it was hard to get there. You had to go around the world in order to get to this place. And when we got there, I noticed I never had been there before, and I told Charlie, I said, they need to pick this place up. There's all kind of trash here. And he said, well, where the flood water comes in, it brings the trash in, and then it goes out. And he said, this has been abandoned for a while, and it's just left the debris here. So it took us probably to walk to the river at least a good 15 minutes. And we was sitting on the east bank of the Pascagoula River, and I was facing a Coast Guard ship, or sitting there looking at a Coast Guard ship. And in the back of my mind, I was wondering, how does something made out of steel float? And that's when I noticed some blue hazy lights flashing from behind us. And I was thinking, now, Charlie done got me in trouble. We on private property down here. And they come to lock us up or put us in jail or run us off. And I wish that had been the case. As I stood up and turned around, and Charlie turned around about the same time I did, there was a craft, a large craft. You couldn't tell the color because it was blue lights, hazy blue lights flashing from it. And then all of a sudden, it just one big bright light just over flooded us where we were. And what I figured that was probably the door on the craft that opened up. And it took just a few seconds to get to where we could see there because of that bright light. And by the
How
time we
big
got
was
to where
this craft? Just
I want to say it was probably 80 foot long and 10 foot high at the doors. Uh, it's really hard to tell how big it was because we was really blinded by the lights.
and you were in
And
shock
by,
too, I imagine.
oh shoot, yeah. And by the time these beings that floated out of the craft and picked us up, two of them got a hold of Charlie, one got a hold of myself. And I immediately felt an injection in my arm, and that kind of settled me down, but it paralyzed me. I I couldn't turn my head or nothing, look to my left or right, but I could see everything straight in front of me, and I was conscious of the noises and the smells and everything that was going on. So he took us to the
When they
floating.
floated out, how high were they off the ground, would you say?
I'd say approximately 2 foot.
Okay. Do you think it was the suits that they may have been wearing that would have allowed them to float, or do you think they could have just
You know,
had the ability to float?
I've thought about that a lot, and it's they had to have somehow to float, whether it was, but I didn't hear any noise coming out of their suits or anything like that. So, I'm really not, I'm really unsure about all this. But I do know one thing. When they grabbed me by the arm, I automatically lifted up to the same level they were, and it wasn't any pain. So it could be something magnetic or something like that that floated us up.
And what did
But
they
there was
look
just,
like? What did they look like exactly? The ones that came to get you when they came to bring you inside the craft.
well, they was probably 4 or 5 foot tall. They didn't have a neck. They was built real husky looking, and had long arms, and they looked like they had mittens on or crab-like hands, but they had gray metallic skin, kind of like an elephant. And that's the best way to describe their skin. It was kind of wrinkled and like an elephant.
So the skin was showing. Like what kind? What was the suit covering? Was it like clothes for us, or was it?
No, I'm not for sure that they even had clothes on.
Okay.
Actually, the more I think about what I seen on them, the ones that picked us up, they had robotic moves and, kind of mechanical. When they moved, they kind of did it in certain motions, and it just made me think it was kind of like a robot taking commands from somewhere else. And then that would make more sense as they got on the inside. There was more of a feminine looking creature that did the examination and all on us. But
And you couldn't run away, I guess, because you were surrounded by water, and the craft was in front of you. And by the time they came out, I guess you couldn't move. I guess you felt
no,
paralyzed.
sir, you couldn't, because I did think about running. 'Cause I kind of looked to the left and looked to the right. There was water on both sides, water in the front, and I was a strong swimmer and all, but there was so much debris in that water where they had worked on them ships, and it was kind of jagged looking metals and everything else in there. So I didn't want to take the chance of doing that. And I was thinking, it happened so fast you really couldn't think. They was just on us and picked us up and took us aboard that little craft.
So
When
what's going through your head as you're being brought aboard this craft?
Actually, at the moment, I was thinking the Ingalls shipyard, which works on ships for the military and experimental projects. Now they got a drone program going on. I was thinking to myself, but some of them big rednecks up there out for a joyride, and they just figured they'd pull a joke on us, and this will all be over in a minute. But it went a lot further than that. It actually went into like a crime mode. If this had been done by a human, it would be a crime. The police would investigate it and call it like a home invasion or an invasion or something of that
And I
sort.
believe they even have. Isn't abduction a crime? You can abduct somebody, can't you?
No, sir, you can't. It's a solid crime.
Okay.
If I was sitting on my couch in here and somebody busted the door down and drug me out to their van and did that, I mean that's a lifetime crime right there. I mean they'd go to the pen a long time here in the States for that.
Yeah. So you're being brought inside this craft. What do you see once you go inside?
The first thing I did, of course, my eyes was fixed straight in front of me, and I didn't have no control where I could turn. But the first thing I wanted to see is why was these lights so bright and where were they coming from? But the lights seemed to be coming out of the wall in the craft. It just kind of illuminated out, kind of like if you painted a room with lights and you opened the door and they just shined. So I looked and the lights was bright, and we made an immediate left. Now I've lost track of where Charlie is or what he was doing at this time. Really didn't care at this time. So we made a left, and then he made a right, and he took me into a little room and laid me on a table at about a 45-degree angle. And he backed up out of the way. That's when the other being come in. Now this other one, I believe I could have took it or her. I call it a her for some reason. But if I could have had all my senses about me, I believe I could have grabbed her and run out the door and had evidence that day.
So she
But
wasn't a robot. Like she was less robotic than the other ones.
right, she had normal fingers. Of course, she didn't look normal in the face or anything, but she was more human-like than what this soldier was, that I call it. And the first thing she did was grab me by the cheek and pinch my skin, and then take her fingers and run down my throat and try to come up through my nasal cavity. And that's when I started bleeding and, losing my breath and all. And it was just like she told me, but her mouth didn't move. But she just put this thought in my head, we're not going to hurt you, it's okay. And then she backed up a little bit.
So it was just a telepathic, almost like thought. You knew it was coming from her.
Yeah, I just knew it did. It wasn't because her mouth moved or anything, but it was just a telepathic thought. Now, something else when we went in, there's something come out of the ceiling about the size of a deck of cards, and it stopped about a foot before it got to my head, and it made a clicking noise. Then it went to the side of my head, to the right, and it made another clicking noise. Then behind my head, and then to the left of my head, and then it went straight back in the ceiling, and I figured that was some kind of a MRE or MRI or something like they do more or less today. Now, I don't know the purpose of all of it, but I figured it's something medical. And I think that this that examined me was more like a doctor than anything, and she just wanted to examine us and see what was going on. So in the back of my mind, I was used for an experiment, or like they used to experiment on animals around here. But after she telepathically sent that thought, she backed up out of the way, and the old big robotic creature, ugly one, he came back in because I was starting to kind of come out of my trance a little bit, get to where I could move, grab me by the arm. Well, when he did, I felt like a puncher. And then later on at the examination at the hospital, they said it was one. So I figured he injected something in me to kind of settle me down. And that's when he picked me up, carried me back outside, set me down on the river, facing the river, my arms stretched out. And next thing I knew, I heard Charlie, Calvin, you okay? And I turned around and looked, and the craft, the light, the bright light just disappeared. I figured that's the door closing. And it just picked up, went straight up into the air and disappeared real quick. So we sat around a little while to try and figure out what to do. Of course, I was wanting to go ahead and get out of there. Charlie said, no, wait a minute. Let's sit down here. And we sat down and we talked about it for a few minutes. I said, look, Charlie, he wanted to call somebody. And of course, it wasn't pay phones then, so you had to go to a phone. I mean, it wasn't cell phones.
What did they do to him? So, was it similar to what happened to you, or was there anything different? Because obviously, he told you his experience, I imagine.
No, I never asked the man. He never told me. We never really talked about our experience.
Okay, now, so it was more of a panic, like, what do we do? Like, do we tell the police?
Yeah.
Do we go home? Do you think we've been infected with something?
Right. Now, I was worried about being some kind of, because they didn't look real healthy to me, and I was worried about getting some kind of a disease, airborne disease or something, or maybe radiation. And I brought that up when we were sitting there. Charlie, we need to go get checked. If we do anything, need to go to the hospital. And he said, don't worry about that. So he never was really concerned about none of that until later on when I brought it up the next day to the sheriff's department. Then they got kind of worried about themselves. But
So you
we
eventually
sat
called the
down.
sheriffs.
Oh, yeah. We left there. When we sat down and talked, I said, Charlie, I don't want nobody to know. I'm going to get married in a month. I don't want to have to explain all this bull back home. And, well, we're not going to tell nobody. But we got up, went to the car. I had trouble cranking the car. It was a brand new car. The window was shattered on the passenger side. All the windows on that side shattered in place. Finally got the car cranked. We went to the store, and that's when Charlie
Why were the windows
called me.
shattered? Was that from the vibration of the craft or something?
It had to be because we was parked probably 100 foot from where the craft landed, and it was facing the craft. The car was pretty much parallel with the craft that landed there, and I figured it's kind of like these opera singers that can break glass with their voice. I figured there was a high enough pitch in here to shatter the windows in place. Plus, it messed the electrical system of the car up.
Okay, so
But
the
we
new
got
car wasn't very new after that.
no, and I was really upset about all that, and I get into that a little later because the sheriff department then made a report on it. I could have turned it over to insurance, but we left there and we went to a little Magic Mart store, and they had a payphone outside. Now in the state of Mississippi in the '70s, 6 o'clock in the evening, the streets roll up. Nothing's open because they have blue laws. So you're not going to find a store or nothing open if you wanted to go in one. But they did have payphones on the outside, and that's where Charlie called Keesler Air Force Base first. And they told him to call the local authorities because they didn't deal with nothing like that anymore. So Charlie called the sheriff department. They said, y'all wait right there. And it wasn't just a few minutes. They pulled up in a patrol car and looked in, give us a field sobriety test to see if we'd been drinking, and told us to follow them to the sheriff department. So we followed there, and they followed up more on the drinking to see if we'd been drinking, and they proved we hadn't. And they took Charlie into a interrogation room. They took myself into an interrogation room and interrogated us. Then they put us into a room together and left out. But little did I know at this time, they had a tape recorder in one of the drawers in that room so they could listen in on what we was talking about. And I know what they thought. We'd get in there and say, tell them, we got one over on them or something like that. But that wasn't the case. So they came back in just a few minutes, took the tape recorder out, and walked into another room. Now, I still didn't know there was a tape recorder. They listened to it. That's when they called the big sheriff to come in, and he was just stunned. He didn't, because of the reactions, the way we was acting on the tape. And he come in there and he told us, he said, y'all can go home. He said, I want to tell y'all, if this had been a hoax, she was going to jail for a long time. But I believe it's something to this. Y'all go home. We'll talk about it tomorrow. So that's when we left and went home. Then we got up the next morning at 7 o'clock and come on back into work. When we got to work, to the place where we worked, that's when I noticed cars that had never been there before, never have I seen in my life. That place was flooded with the news media. There was cameras set up outside in the yard and all. I didn't know what was going on. I thought it was maybe some kind of special event the shipyard was having. I didn't know they was there for Charlie and I. But we went ahead and made it to the gate. We got brassed in, went on to our workstations. And it wasn't just a minute. They sent somebody from the office to pick us up and bring us back to the office. And we got in there, and the owner of the shipyard come in. He said, we cannot conduct business with what's going on. And I was thinking, well, why in the world is he telling us this? He said, the press is here because something happened to y'all, you two, last night. And they want to interview. And the phones is ringing. We can't even conduct our business because of the phones ringing the way they are. So I thought, uh-oh. And sat back and thought just a minute. They said, we got our company lawyer coming over. He's going to give a press release. And then y'all going to the hospital and get checked out. Then you're going to Keesler Air Force Base and be checked for radiation. And that's what happened. They come down, they gave us a press release, or he gave a press release. He escorted us with the sheriff department to the hospital. They did a thorough examination, blood work and everything. And they decided that the punctures on us could have been an injection that I had on my arms, where we kind of settled down. Then they took us to Keesler Air Force Base, and they checked us for radiation. When we pulled up, it was an Air Force Base. We didn't even have to stop at the gate. They just had an escort and escorted us right on up to the building. And there was 4 or 5 guys out there in these hazmat suits. They checked us for radiation. Then when that was over, one of them hollered all clear, and they said, well, they want to see you inside. So they had a guard escort us down to a conference room. And it was a lot of the local, and why they did this, I don't know, how the local police departments, the mayors, all the staff of the service, high-ranking military officers, and all was in there. And we had to explain to them what went on. And they did like a news interview with us, I guess, for a press release. And they was real nice and courteous and told us we could go. So we went back out, got in the patrol car, and that's when we went back to our workstation. And they told us that Dr. John Allen Hynek was on his way down, and he wanted to see us in the morning for us to be back at the shipyard in the morning. And that's when they had the press set up for their big press release at the shipyard. And sure enough, good to the word, Dr. Hynek and Dr. John Allen Harder was at the shipyard waiting to talk to Charlie and I. And they did a pretty intense interview with the both of us. And they had already been out to the place where this happened. And that's another thing I don't understand. And back then, well, I do, it being back when this happened, because there was there was 3 TV stations on the TV. It was ABC, NBC, and CBS. Nobody ever talked about it. I didn't even know what a UFO was.
Oh,
and
yeah,
nobody
of course,
talked about it.
because there's no internet either, and news didn't travel fast.
No, sir. No cell phones, no internet, 3 TV stations. You had 3 old geezers that's been there for 100 years on TV that did the news. And unless you was the president of the United States, nothing got broke into. So the news media was really starving for news. And that's one reason that I think it went over so big, because there wasn't any news back then. The biggest thing, that we had just went through was Watergate or something like that. So anyhow, they should have taped off the site where this happened, because I'm sure there was evidence left there, but they didn't. Dr. Heineck went down and he searched the site, and he actually had reports on everything that went on, what he found. Now, I didn't get to see his reports, and the only thing he said to me is that, or he gave a press release, he said, I believe these guys are legitimate. If they acted, they should be in Hollywood because they're good actors. He said, I believe them.
Right, and your friend had been in the North Korean War and seen action, and apparently, from what I understand, he was quite traumatized by the experience as well.
Yeah, and North Korea was a pretty tough battle for their people. It was cold, they starved, and I've heard stories. Now, me and him never talked about it, but I've heard stories since then about what the man went through in North Korea. And if you was battle driven back then, you was kind of a hard ass. But
you're in a situation where you had no control over what was happening to you, and these are beings from you don't know where coming down,
right,
and I guess you're lucky that you are alive, and they decided to release you after whatever they did.
yes, sir. You were, like I say, I don't care how bad that you would be, or if you was even harmed. I don't believe it was nothing you could do about it. We just had to go along with what they wanted. And because I know the next day at the shipyard, some of the men, they all had their rifles or guns or pistols, and they was fixing to get in their boats at night and go hunting these things, which, that was ridiculous. I knew they was already young. And I told them, I said, you fellas better not, if you find them, you better not shoot at them, because I feel like you'll pay for this if you do. But that was just the mentality of the Mississippi rednecks back in. If you can't fix it, then you shoot it. So that's pretty much the way they felt.
And what were the other sightings? I guess people in the town saw strange lights in the sky that night. What were some of the other reports that had come in that collaborated what you and your friend went through?
We actually had a parole officer that was going across the bridge that night, and he seen it, so that would put law enforcement there. There was a preacher that seen the craft when it picked up off the ground of one of the churches in Pascagoula, and he seen the craft leaving. And then there was a guy a preacher from Greece that seen the things in the sky that, while he was coming across the bridge. So we have that many witnesses. Then there was some of the local people that lived around that seen it, and some of them just came out in '73 at the book signing. And, you want to think in the back of your mind that people wouldn't tell you a story about something like that if it didn't happen. And I really believe these people, because, we was with there was stories like, we was with our mom and dad and we seen this, and we was standing in the backyard. We know this happened. We just waited to see you to tell about it, because I had completely disappeared out of the public eye. I didn't want nothing to do with any of this. Now, Charles Hickson took a different path than I did. He made every public talk show, every public event. He wrote a book. I got a copy of his book. I never read it because I didn't want nothing to do with all this. And then why I decided to do the book when I did, like I say, the news meter. My wife and I was at a wake one night, and I signed a register. Now, this was 45 years later, and I signed a register, and somebody recognized my name on the register. That's how far, the memory a lot of people around here about this story. And they asked me, "Are you the Calvin Parker?" I said, "Well, I guess I am the Calvin Parker." They said, "No, the one that got abducted in '73." I said, "Yeah." I said, "But look, this isn't the place to talk about this. Uh, this man has a family in here and they're grieving, and all these people standing around me wanting to hear the story." So I told my wife, "Let's get out of here." And on the way home, she said, "Look, you've never talked to me about this. We've been married 45 years. You never talked to me about any of this. You never told your friends about none of this. You never said nothing to nobody about it. None of the families ever asked you about it because they always thought that was a personal deal." And she was telling the truth there. You know, I never had talked about it. Nobody's asked me about it. Everybody just kept it quiet. So she said, "Why don't you write a book and tell your story?" Well, I don't have much of an education, but I told her, I said, "Okay, you know, just to get her off my back." I said, "I'll find a ghostwriter and we'll write it." Knowing that I wasn't going to look for a ghostwriter or would never find one probably if I did. But it just so happened that the next day my phone was ringing and it was Philip Mantle. And he had some questions he wanted to ask me about Charlie's book. Now, he's the publisher of my book, The Flying Disc, in the UK there. And he had some questions that he wanted to ask me about Charlie's book. And I told him, I said, "You know, I don't know nothing about Charlie's book. I don't even have a copy of it." He said, "Really?" He said, "I want to ask you stuff." I said, "I don't want to talk about it." I said, "I got enough problems on my own." I explained to him what happened at the wake the day before. He said, why don't you write your own book? You put it, it's your legacy. You put it down. Nobody can change your story then. It's black and white. And you write that, then it speaks for itself. You can do away with these interviews. Just tell them to buy the book. And that made a lot of sense to me. And I said, "Well, let me think about it. I've been kicking around writing a book." I said, "I'll get back to you." Well, we hung the phone up, and I had never had intentions on getting back with him about a book. I just said that to get him off my back and keep my wife's mouth shut. So it wasn't a week later, the phone rung, and I picked it up. It was Philip again. Well, between Philip and my wife, they talked me into it. I said, "Well, I don't have nothing but just a few notes that I had taken down trying to remember stuff, Philip." And that was the truth. Because during the Hurricane Katrina, you know, we lost everything. We had 8 foot of water in the house. So, you know, we didn't have no records or nothing that survived all that. But just my memory where I had just jotted down. He said, "Well, send them to me. Let me see them." And I guess he was thinking I was had a manuscript or something I was writing. I sent them to him. The next day he sent them back. He said, "That's quite a mess." He said, "We got a lot of work to do to get this book out if you want to write a book." I said, "Philip, don't have an education. I don't know anything about it." I said, "But one thing I do know is what happened to me. I know I've never shared it. I've got a lot of pressure on me, people wanting to hear about it." And I said, "The people that I know and the people that live around here especially deserve to hear about this." I said, "I'll try." I said, "With your help, I'll try it." And that's when I started putting the book together. Of course, I went and bought a computer so I would have spell check on the computer. Because, again, I didn't know how to spell, so, you know, I just needed some help with it. And I sent him the first chapter, and he sent me an outline, chapter to chapter, what I needed to do. Like, chapter 1 needs to be introduce yourself, how you met, chapter 2, how you met Charlie, chapter 3, the encounter, and then the aftermath was after that. And that's kind of the outline I took. And Philip has been a real champ through all this. I mean, I couldn't. There would be no book if it hadn't been for Philip Mantle. So I wrote the book, and I told him, I said, Philip, the only way I'm doing this, I know I'm a redneck. I know I don't know literature. I know I don't know how to write a book, and I don't really care. I said, the only way I'm going to do this, if nothing has changed in this book, nothing's edited, the way I give you this book is raw, and that's the way I want it to stay. And he said, well, you don't want to edit it. I said, no, sir, I do not want to edit this book. I want it raw. And we had that agreement up front. Now, he's took a little flack over that, but, it's really worked out. The people that's read the book said it's like sitting in the living room with you and you telling the story.
And you did pass a lie detector test regarding this, from what I understand, and I think there's some other documentation in the book that helps support everything that you went through. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Now, I have to say Philip was good with coming up with documentation. We have a lie detector test, a voice stress test, went under hypnosis, uh, went through some kind of other little truth test they was coming out with, uh, where they hook electricity to you, you lie, it shocks you, and it's a pretty good shock because they tell you to tell them a lie. And it put a pretty good joke into you. Now I didn't put this one in the book. I just when you mentioned lie detector test, I just thought of it, how painful this thing was for to tell a lie. And I wish I had one here. I'd like to hook it to people when they walk in the door. But yeah, Philip did really good about documenting. Uh, while I was writing the book on my story, he was putting together all these articles that come out of all over the world where it happened, all the documentation, all the proof. He was able to get the manuscripts from the secret tapes of the sheriff department. And one more thing he got that really surprised me. I had mentioned to Philip, I said, I met Bud Hopkins one time. I had some missing time. And I got to, a friend of mine took me to see Bud Hopkins because he had wrote a book on missing times. And Bud tried to hypnotize me. And I don't believe he ever hypnotized me. He said, oh, I know Bud very well. I said, well, good. You call him up and talk to him, see if I was hypnotized. He said, Bud passed away a pretty good while back. I said, well, I hate to hear that because I did like Bud Hopkins. And he said, let me see if I can get a hold of his notes from that. Now, I never thought Bud hypnotized me, but Philip was able to he called Dr. Jacobs, and Dr. Jacobs had all his information and all, and he sent the tape where Dr. Jacobs called me and asked if he had his permission to send that tape to Philip. I said, certainly you do. But I still had no idea I was hypnotized. And Philip got the tape and he wrote it in the book. He transcribed it out in the book. Now we have a copy of the disc. But he transcribed it. And when he sent it to me over the computer, in a format there for me to read, I couldn't even read it because I was so shocked that I was hypnotized. I didn't know it. But what he had done was put a post-hypnotic suggestion in my head that I only would remember the things that I could handle and wanted to remember when the time got ready. And up until he did this, I know I walked out read some of it, and I walked out on the porch and I told my wife, I said, you remember when we seen Bud Hopkins and he said he hypnotized me? Or we went to get hypnotized and said, yeah. I said, he hypnotized me. There's probably a 2 or 3 hour session here.
Wow.
And that was shocking to me.
So there's a lot of things that collaborate your story in this, and of course, you're probably not making that much money on the book, but this is the first thing you've put out in all these years that actually could make money. So initially, when this story came out, there was no benefit to you because you didn't actually like being recognized for this.
Exactly right. I don't, and it's, I don't think anyone in the UFO industry really makes what they call them, ufologists or whatever they call them,
Yeah,
that write books and do things like that. It's not any money in that. Uh, Most of my work, 99% of my work now, I had a book signing down here in Pascagoula, and I got to talk to the people and meet the people. And about 99% of my work is more or less like going around and meeting people and doing favors for other people. Now, it's like Pascagoula has put together a fund to help the city, and I go and do book signings and all, and they sell books. And I just get a little bit off every book. It's not a whole lot. Now, it could possibly, we got things working, and I'm not in this for the money because my living's made. I'm retired, and but we have things making that could possibly make a little bit. Now, like everybody says, well, you on the radio or you're on TV every day. I said, yeah, I am, usually 2 or 3 times a day. I said, but keep in mind, they don't send Calvin Parker a check for getting on the radio or news, don't pay for news. I said, it's news, that's what it is. And I don't want to charge for what I'm doing like this. Where a lot of people, and I told Philip, I'm going to make the circuit on the conference this year, because I never have been to these conferences, and I'm kind of looking forward to going. And but I'm not going to do like a lot of these people do. I'm not going to make a career out of going to these things every year. This year, when October hits of this year, October the 11th, I got one more book signing that I've agreed to do, and then I'm going off grid. I got a houseboat. I'll be on that. And they won't be but one way to get a hold of me, and that's getting a boat and come out in this river somewhere or the ocean and find me. And that's the way I want to live life. I got a big house. I'm going to get rid of this house, and I'm getting on this houseboat, and I won't need electricity or the way I've got it set up or nothing. I don't want a cell phone on it. I might have a radio, a VHF radio. So if somebody wants to get a hold of me or want to talk about this, they better do it between now and October of this year. And I agreed. That's one thing I did agree on with Philip, that I would make the circle. And, the conferences and things like that and help promote the book. But October's the end of my contract.
And what do you think now that the internet's out there and YouTube? There's lots, of course there's some fake videos out there, but there seems to be a lot of very unexplainable UFO videos coming out all the time. Do you think it's getting more accepted in mainstream culture now, and it's less of a joke than it was in past decades?
I feel like, it's no doubt about it, I feel like that sooner or later somebody is going to get the evidence that they need, and it will go all across the world immediately because of the internet. You can get on this thing and see anything. I was talking to a reporter that interviewed me, Doug. He's a local reporter here for ABC News. And he said, after Katrina, I thought the highlight of my career would be going to Washington and talking to the president when they was trying to appropriate funds for down here. And I thought that would be the highlight of my career. But when I got back home, he said, you know what the highlight was, what got more interest than anything I've ever done? I said, what was that, Doug? He said, one of these rednecks in Van Cleve, Mississippi, which is just right over Pascagoula here, had a deer cam out in the woods, and they got pictures of UFOs on this deer cam, and it hit the internet, and it's exploded. It's all over. And he said that got more attention than what what I did going to Washington. I said, so I guess the deer cam's a highlight of my career.
And it is a matter of not just national but international security. If these things are in our airspace, we don't know if maybe they are from Earth, from an enemy country, or probably they're not. Probably they're from somewhere else. But this is kind of a dangerous thing if these things are in our airspace and they're undetected.
Oh, it is. And it's something that will, sooner or later, something's going to have to happen. Now, personally, I feel like they might travel now. Used to it was a big thing. I was looking back, you'd hear of a UFO regular, but now I think they kind of travel interdimensional. So, it's a big deal. It is national security,
Well,
and that's one reason they keep it quiet.
yeah, because they say that they're not interested. I know in Canada, the government said, and the government has actually admitted that there's more sightings, but they say they're not going to investigate it themselves. They're going to leave it up to people to privately investigate it. But I would find no matter what it is, if we don't know what it is and it's in our airspace, that is very dangerous for sure. We want to know what's in our airspace. But
Exactly right. There's so much interest in this right now, and it's more and more. You have the History Channel that's showing this ancient alien, and actually some of the stuff they talk about makes a lot of sense. Up until I wrote the book, I didn't pay no attention to this. I just figured it was a bunch of people that wanted their 5 minutes, and I feel like some of them are. But I made a point to go see Betty Hill. I flew up and interviewed her, and I tell you why. She and her husband, Betty and Barney Hill, had a sighting in the 60s. And, it was a pretty big deal back then. But you know what convinced me it was true? It wasn't the sighting they had or the evidence they had. They were a mixed couple. And back then, a white woman didn't marry a black man and get away with it. It just wasn't heard of. And I said, if they put that much publicity on themselves, as deep set, as hard against what people are against that right now, it's got to be something to it. And I got to go, I spent 3, 4 days at her house, and she is a great person, a lovely person. And we talked, and she asked me a lot of questions. I did her. And we even went up into the mountains where they had their sighting. And she said that every now and then she goes up there and looks and she sees something. Now, I don't know. But, that was good therapy for me to go see her. But that was the reason I really believed her, because she wouldn't put that much pressure on herself, not in the 60s, if that hadn't happened.
so in the end, do you consider yourself kind of unique for having this experience and you're not that upset about it anymore, or is this still something that traumatizes you and you'd rather that it never happened to you, and the pain and suffering you've been through isn't worth the experience?
Well, I had rather it not happen, but the older a person gets, the better they learn to deal with things. And that's the situation I'm in. I had to learn to deal with it because I didn't want to die and take us to the grave and people not know really what happened to me. I had a friend, and we was sitting over there on his porch drinking a cold beer, to be honest with you. And he said, "Where have you been, Calvin?" I said, "Oh, I've been writing a book." He said, "What you been writing a book about?" Well, I told him. He said, "We fished together." He said, "We've told each other many a lies, but you never lied to me about this because you never talked to me about it." So that's when I knew I was doing the right thing. Plus, my wife, She had no idea. I have a daughter. She had no idea. Uh, I had a certain group of friends, and it's not that many of them because I didn't trust too many people. But the friends that I had, about 6 or 7 of them, we all have boats. We all love to fish. We all live on the river. Most all, one of them had about $1 million houseboat down here. And during the summer, we'd all come down. We'd get on a houseboat. We'd cook. We'd barbecue. We'd visit. We all go fish our separate ways. Then during the winter, we'd go our separate ways, and wouldn't nobody hear from nothing unless somebody needed something. But if one of us needed something, we all pulled together and done it. My house flooded. One of them gave me the tile. I didn't have insurance at the time. One of them had a mobile home park. He's selling mobile homes and all. He said, look, he said, I got a bunch of tile in storage. Come get it. I didn't want to do it. He said, no, come get it. Well, I got it, brought it in, fixing to put it down. Well, I got a friend that owns a construction company, and I speak about all of them in the book. And I have a friend that owns a construction company, and he sent crews over to help put this down. I mean, that's just the kind of friends we are. And when they needed help, I was there for them. And you can do that with just a few friends. And it's not, and you know, Facebook's great to get out and meet people and chat and talk about things.
Yeah, and you're on that for people that want to follow you. They can look you up, Calvin Parker, on Facebook, just to throw that out there for our listeners.
Right. And, you know, I do this because there's a few people that want to keep up with what's going on with this. And I try to get on it every day. And I try, you know, I will speak to a few people every day on Facebook. And if somebody emails me or writes me, I'll answer them. And I try to keep everybody in the loop of what's happening. Because I didn't write the book for me. I wrote it for everybody. And that's just the way that I feel about it. And what I'm trying to do with this is make it easier on somebody else that might have a sighting or an abduction, and let them know how to go about handling this a little better than what I did. There was no schooling back when I did this. Nobody knew how to handle things. Now somebody asks, what do I do? Well, the first thing you do is get to a safe place. Call the law enforcement. Let them check it like a crime scene. And that's what it is, a crime scene. And then document everything that you've seen while you're thinking about it. Get something, write it all down, or get a tape recorder. Everybody has cell phones now. It's no reason not to get pictures anymore if you can. And it's just things that's coming forward now that a person could do that they couldn't do back in the day that it happened to me. I mean, number one, nobody ever heard of UFOs or aliens, so they didn't know what to do about it.
There was no books on abductions. You might find a fiction book on aliens if you'd searched in the library, but
yeah, but the law enforcement didn't know how to handle it, and actually they made it harder on the person that got abducted than what the aliens would by the time it was all over. And the news media, most of them is just glorified idiots now. And I don't mind saying that, but it's the truth. You know, they won't tell the news like it is. And that's the only place that Donald Trump and I meet eye to eye. And I don't get into politics at all, but I've heard him talking about fake news and stuff. But I can relate to him on that.
Well, anyone that's been in the news or any type of public figure knows a little bit about how people spin the news and details that are left out a lot of the times. But did any ufologists or alien expert speculate on what type of species of aliens it may have been that you encountered? Because obviously we know about there's a gray species, which are more of the classic species, and then we've heard that there's like a tall white type species of alien, but I never really. Yours is kind of unique, so I was just curious if anyone tried to speculate of possibly a name of that type of alien species that you may have encountered.
No, nobody ever has. I've been meaning, Philip, the publisher of the book, he's a ufologist, whatever they call him, and the only thing I ever heard him say about it, and he was saying it to a guy. They're working on a documentary now with this, and he said, "Well, look, Calvin, it was a unique encounter that he had with a unique uh, species, and that was the only thing he ever said." I would like to hear him on a show talk about it, or two or three different ones.
Yeah, because a lot of people that aren't really that familiar with the possibility of aliens, they always assume there's only one species, but the universe is so vast. Even there's not even one, like, people on Earth are a lot different, let alone beings from other planets or other galaxies. They all might have different intentions, and the ones that you described are definitely unique. As you said, they may have been robots, but the crab-like hands I think you described, I never heard of anyone else describe encountering aliens like that. So it's a very interesting and unique story. And I haven't ordered your book yet, but I will definitely order your book, and it is available on Amazon. Do you want to remind people the different ways they could purchase your book?
As far as I know, Amazon is the best way to get it right now, and it's also out in audio and Kindle through Amazon. Uh, I don't, I don't even think Philip sends out copies. If it's to like for book signings and things with a flying disc. But Amazon's the closest way to get it. Pascagoula, the closest encounter. My story, Calvin Parker.
Well, I really appreciate that you took the time to speak with us, and I'm happy that you came out with the full documentation of your story, because it's obviously important to get these type of incidents documented, and yours seems very credible. You went through the right chains, as you've mentioned, and the police even tested you, and especially in those days, you're not going to suspect a room is bugged when you leave the room.
No,
And
plus, they did something else that I was glad of. They checked us for drugs and drinking and all that. And I'm glad they done it now. Back in, it really didn't matter to me. But it's a good thing they done that, because I helped put a little credibility into the book. And anything I could do to get the credibility. And that's like I told somebody, if you don't believe it, buy the book, read it. The evidence is in there to stand up in a court of law if this thing went, if it ever went to a judge in a court of law like it was a criminal, the evidence is there to back everything up. And you got eyewitnesses, you got voice stress tests, you got polygraph tests, you got everything in there.
And finally, to close this interview off, is there anything you want to say to our listeners about your book, and any final message?
No, I would just like to get the book out there and let everybody read it, because it's going to help some people sometime. If it just helps one person know how to deal with something like this, it'll be worth it.
Excellent.
So,
Well, thanks again for sharing your story with us, and I will definitely stay in contact with you, and it was a pleasure to speak with you.